I'm Marion. Standing in the middle of my once-lost living room, the afternoon light filtering through the window, I'm reminded of the emotional storm that raged just a few months ago. The silence in this empty space is a stark contrast to the chaos that nearly cost me everything. It all started with a voicemail. After 9 long hours on the operating table, I woke up to 73 missed calls. My throat was raw from the breathing tube, and my back was locked in a brace I couldn't yet feel. The phone on the tray table was lit up like a fire alarm. With a hand that barely worked, I pressed play on the voicemail from my father. "Honey, don't be upset. We sold your condo to pay for your sister Lily's wedding. You were out cold, so we signed the papers for you. $425,000. It's handled." My home, the one place that was truly mine, was gone while a machine breathed for me. The wedding was just 3 weeks away, and I could barely lift my arm. But I knew I had to take action. That one phone call I made set in motion a chain of events that none of them had anticipated. I'm a surgical nurse, which has taught me to stay calm under pressure. When the nurse, a kind woman named Ava, came in to check my vitals and told me the surgery had gone well, I asked her to play the voicemail again. I thought maybe the anesthesia was distorting the words, but it was all too real. My father's voice was calm, almost cheerful, as if he was certain I'd forgive him. I stared at the ceiling tiles and started taking mental notes. Sold, signed, out, cold. These facts were like a triage board in my mind. I assessed that someone had put my name on a document while I was unconscious in this very building. It wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a signature that should not exist. So, I asked Ava for a copy of my anesthesia record, including the times. She gave me a look like I might be confused, but I was already building a case. That condo was more than just square footage. I bought it at 30 when I came back from my second tour as an army medic. I was a single woman with a government nurse's salary and a back that ached on cold mornings. The bank almost laughed me out of the office, but I had saved like it was a mission. I put down every dollar I had, and they handed me the key to a 4th-floor unit with a view of a parking lot and a strip of sky. I cried in that empty living room on the first night, sitting on the floor because I didn't even own a chair. For 6 years, I paid down that mortgage. I worked double shifts, packed my lunches, and said no to vacations my friends took without me. By the time I went in for surgery, I had nearly $300,000 of equity in those walls. It was the first door in my life that no one could tell me to walk out of, and my family knew exactly what it meant to me. For months earlier, my father had half-jokingly asked if I'd ever borrow against the condo to help with Lily's big day. I said no without hesitation, thinking that would be the end of it. But I've since learned that for some people, no is just the beginning. After that conversation, I took precautions. I told my father plainly that the condo was off limits to everyone but me, and I saw his jaw tighten. I called my bank and asked them to flag my accounts for any unusual activity. And most importantly, I dug up an old power of attorney. Years ago, before a deployment, I'd signed an emergency POA naming my father in case I got hurt overseas and someone had to handle my bills or lease. I'd never canceled it, so 2 days before my surgery, in a blur of pre-op paperwork, I signed a revocation. I handed my father a paper copy across his kitchen table and told him I was just cleaning up old documents. He took it, nodded, and set it by the fruit bowl. I felt protected, but little did I know. 4 days after the surgery, I was discharged. My surgeon was pleased with how the fusion looked on the films, and my pain was under control with oral meds. I was shuffling the hallway with a walker, which was the requirement for leaving the hospital. But as I sat in the wheelchair on the way to the curb, I realized I had nowhere to go. My condo, the place where I'd planned to recover, now belonged to someone else. I called my friend, Mia. We've been friends since nursing orientation 15 years ago. She's the kind of friend who shows up with a cooler and a folding cot. She drove me to a short-term rental 2 miles from the hospital, a beige, furnished place that smelled like other people's vacations. While she fussed over me, I pulled out a fresh notebook. The army had taught me that in chaos, you make a list and work through it. I wrote down the surgery date, the day the voicemail came, and left a space for the time they claimed I'd signed the deed. The next morning, I made the call to a real estate attorney, Mr. Harris. He was recommended by a coworker who'd survived a messy divorce. I described what had happened in a flat voice, just like I do for handoff reports. He listened without interrupting and then asked 3 crucial questions. Was there a power of attorney naming my father? Yes, an old one. Did I revoke it? Yes, 2 days before surgery in writing. And who was the buyer? I didn't know yet. He then told me that if the deed was signed under a revoked authority, it might not be valid, but I'd have to prove it step by step. He asked me to get all the closing documents and not to talk to my family about the details. I hung up and underlined the question, who is the buyer? In my notebook. That afternoon, my parents showed up. My mother, Helen, came in first with a grocery store bouquet and a casserole. My father, Richard, hung back, hands in his pockets, looking wounded but reasonable. My mother said they'd been worried sick, but I pointed out that they'd only called after the surgery. She started talking fast, saying they'd had no choice. The wedding vendors needed deposits, and the market was perfect. She said I shouldn't stress in my condition and then dropped the line that would haunt me, honey, it's just a condo. Your sister only gets married once. My father then chimed in, saying I was always the strong one and that I'd understand. Lily needed this, and I didn't. I asked who notarized my signature. My mother glanced at my father, and he looked at the carpet, saying it was all handled properly. Then he made a mistake and said that Mr. Thompson, a longtime family friend, had taken care of the paperwork. I wrote his name in my notebook and drew a box around it. Before they left, my mother tried to trap me with a warning. The money was already moving, and if I did anything rash, I'd ruin Lily's wedding. She said in 3 weeks, it would all be over, and we could move on. But I knew a deadline was just a number on a timeline, and 3 weeks was my window. After they left, I faced a problem. To prove the deed was void, I needed my copy of the revocation, which was locked in a file box in the condo I no longer had access to. All my important documents were in there, and I felt like they'd locked the proof inside the very thing they'd stolen. Mr. Harris worked quickly. Within 2 days, he'd pulled the recorded documents from the county and the file from the title company. He emailed me a scan, and Mia held my laptop steady because sitting up made my back scream. There it was, the deed that had erased 6 years of my life. The buyer was Mr. Thompson, my father's old business partner. The sale was all cash, and the price was a shock. They'd sold my $425,000 home for $300,000. It was a fire sale to a friend, and I knew my father had lied in the voicemail. Mr. Harris said it was a red flag, an all-cash deal well under market to a close associate of the person holding the power of attorney. That night, I couldn't sleep. Mia and I compared my real signatures with the one on the deed. Mine had a hard downstroke on the M from signing charts quickly, while the one on the deed was rounder and more careful. It was close, but it wasn't mine. The notary block at the bottom of the deed was what really stopped me. The notary had certified that I'd personally appeared before her and signed the document at 2:15 in the afternoon on the day of my surgery. I knew I'd been on the operating table at that time, but I needed proof. The next morning, Lily called. Her voice was a mix of apology and accusation. She said she knew Mom and Dad had figured out the money but hadn't asked for details. She had a wedding to plan and just assumed it was handled. I repeated that they'd sold my home, and she said it was just a condo, the same tired phrase. I realized she'd chosen not to know because it might have cost her the perfect day. I decided to confront Mr. Thompson. Mia drove me to his office. He tried to act reasonable, saying my father had authority and that he'd bought the condo fair and square. But when I pointed out that he'd bought a $400,000 home for $300,000 from a man whose daughter was unconscious in surgery, he didn't flinch. He said my father owed him, and this squared things up. He even told me to let it go, saying it would be hard to prove anything from a hospital bed. I smiled and told him he'd be surprised what I could prove lying down. The medical records came back. The anesthesia record was a beautiful thing. It showed that at 2:15 in the afternoon on the day of my surgery, I was face down on the operating table with a tube in my throat and a surgeon's hands in my back. I called Mr. Harris and read him the Times. He was excited, saying it was an air-tight alibi. But he also reminded me that to make the deed completely void, I needed the revocation. I lay awake half the night, frustrated that the most important document was locked in the condo. Then, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I remembered. When I'd signed the revocation, I'd scanned it, photographed it on my phone, and emailed it to an old army contact. I found the email and forwarded it to Mr. Harris with the message found it. Look at the date. He called me back and said this changed everything. We had strong grounds to argue that the deed was void. He laid out our plan. We'd file a quiet title action in civil court, make a criminal referral, and file a claim with the title company and their underwriter. He warned me that once we filed, it would become public, and my family would know. I looked at the calendar. There were 18 days to the wedding, and I decided to make it loud on my schedule. I knew filing meant my father could face criminal charges, and my mother must have sensed it. She called that evening, crying and begging me not to do anything. She asked if I really wanted to send my father to prison over a building. I told her I wasn't the one who'd forged a name and sold a home that wasn't theirs. I was just refusing to pay for it with 6 years of my life. We filed the paperwork. Mr. Harris walked me through each signature page over video. The quiet title complaint went to civil court, and a notice of pending litigation was recorded against the condo. The property was legally frozen. The first wave hit fast. I heard through my mother's angry texts that Mr. Thompson had called my father in a panic. My family knew I'd taken action, and the tone of their calls changed. My father came to the rental alone. He looked older, his shirt wrinkled. He told me about a failed business project and how he'd owed Mr. Thompson $150,000. He said he couldn't stand the thought of our family looking like failures in front of Lily's in-laws, the Martins, who were wealthy. He asked me to drop the lawsuit until after the wedding, but I told him he'd erased me, and I was just taking back what was mine. I prepared for the rehearsal dinner. I built a folder with all the evidence, the revocation, the deed with the forged signature, the anesthesia record, and a letter from Mr. Harris stating that the deed was void. I practiced walking with a cane, determined to stand on my own 2 feet at the dinner. 4 days before the wedding, Lily called again. Her voice was different. She'd heard about the police and asked what was happening. I told her the truth, the old power of attorney, the revocation, the forged signature, and the cash deal. She was silent for a long time and then said they'd told her I'd agreed to help. I realized they'd lied to her to keep her hands clean. The rehearsal dinner was at a fancy country club, paid for by the Martins. My mother found me in the lobby and tried to stop me from making a scene. She said it wasn't the night and that I'd lose the family if I embarrassed them in front of the Martins. She repeated that it was just a condo, but I told her it was the one thing in the family that none of them had built. My father introduced me to the Martins, painting me as the generous, strong-willed daughter. When he started his toast about sacrifice, I stood up. I told everyone about my spine surgery and how my condo had been sold while I was unconscious. I showed the deed, the anesthesia record, and the revocation. My father exploded, yelling at me for embarrassing the family. But I stayed calm and told him he'd sold the proof that I ever stood on my own. The Martins were shocked, and my mother was in tears. Then Lily stood up and walked over to me. She said she didn't know it was this bad and that she was sorry. The law moved as Mr. Harris had predicted. Faced with the evidence, Mr. Thompson's attorney advised him to stop defending the deed. The court declared the deed void, and the title to the condo returned to my name. The title company's underwriter settled with me, covering my legal fees. The criminal side didn't go away. Detective Foster interviewed my father and Mr. Thompson. They had to explain their actions, and there were consequences. A few months later, I was back in my living room. The wedding had been postponed, and Lily and I were slowly rebuilding our relationship. My parents and I speak rarely. I've learned that love that only flows one way isn't love at all. It's an invoice, and I've stopped paying it. This is how a quiet woman takes her life back.